Welcome to Practice Masterclass, presented by Magentis. This episode will cover the crucial topic of insurance and compliance with the help of Avant's National Risk Advisory and Performance Manager, Emma Saint. Avant provides an extensive range of services and support for the medical and healthcare industry, including insurance, lending, and practice management. Emma will discuss insurance policies and compliance obligations that all practices need to consider, and share insight into risk strategies and the different resources and support available. Here's Emma.
The aim of this presentation is to provide general advice about the types of insurance a practice owner should consider as their practice grows. The purpose of insurance is to provide a safety net or financial support should an incident occur, regardless of the risk management systems the practice has in place. Insurance is something that is commonly not considered or evaluated until after an incident occurs. The presentation provides general advice about the things a practice owner should consider as their practice changes and grows. If a practice needs personal advice about the type of insurance they need, a broker is always an option. However, it's important to note that if a practice chooses a broker, they should choose someone that has experience in the healthcare sector, as healthcare needs are quite nuanced. So let's start at the beginning. In Australia, it is mandatory for doctors to have practitioner indemnity insurance in place. This is a requirement that's stated by the national law. It's also articulated in the Medical Board of Australia Professional Indemnity Standards. And it is also noted that other AHPRA registered health professionals also have a requirement for professional indemnity insurance. For doctors in private practice, they hold their own practitioner indemnity insurance. However, if they're in the public sector, sometimes their employer may provide employee indemnity or insurance for them. And this can be similar for nurses and physiotherapists. It is a mandatory requirement for doctors in Australia to have up to $20 million worth of indemnity insurance, and this is to cover them if they're sued by a patient, i.e. a patient launches civil litigation. A doctor can also have cover for things that protect their reputation. At Avant, we call this Part B cover, and that covers things such as if there's an AHPRA investigation into their care, or if there's a Medicare or private health insurance investigation into how they bill patients, or if there's an employment dispute or a training dispute. It is important to note that not all practitioner indemnity insurance providers provide the same level of cover, and it is important to check what that cover is. We also have a definition of healthcare within a practitioner indemnity insurance policy. So a doctor should check to understand what the definition of healthcare is, because that actually governs what a policy responds to, and not all healthcare definitions are the same. So, what do you need to know about your practice insurance and other insurance? As a practice owner, it's important to know that practitioner indemnity insurance may not cover care that's delivered by the practice entity or the practice team. As a practice owner, it is important to note that practitioner indemnity insurance policy may not provide all the cover they need. Different insurers provide a different level of cover for doctors when they are practice owners. At Avant, we have a definition of sole practitioner, and what that means is that we provide cover for the practice entity and the practice team if the doctor meets the definition of sole practitioner, i.e. if they are a doctor of that same specialty, or they solely own the practice, we can provide some level of cover to the practice team. Again, not all insurance providers have this same definition, so it is really important to check with your practitioner indemnity provider if you're a practice owner and you want to make sure your practice team are covered as well as the entity. So a practice owner should consider if they need cover for the healthcare that's delivered by the practice. In Australia, it's not mandatory for a practice to have insurance cover to protect the healthcare that they provide. The purpose of practice medical indemnity insurance, also referred to medical malpractice insurance, and in this presentation I'll refer to it as PMIP, is to provide cover to the practice entity and for the practice team that are employed by the practice. So what type of things could a PMIP support a practice with? They can support a practice if the practice is sued because a patient slips through the cracks and they say, look, the practice team didn't support my follow-up, or this receptionist breached my privacy at the reception desk and I am not happy about that care, so I'm suing the practice. It is not a legal requirement for a practice to have medical malpractice insurance, and it's often something that a practice may not consider until they receive patient feedback. It is important to know what a practice medical indemnity insurance policy provides to the practice, because in some cases it may support the practice when it's sued. Other providers may give additional support, such as help the practice to respond to APRA feedback or a Medicare audit if they're drawn into a shared debt recovery scheme claim, or it could also help the practice respond to an employee dispute or provide assistance to protect their reputation. There are also some non-financial support a practice medical indemnity policy can give to a practice, such as access to medico-legal advisory support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in an emergency situation, or risk advisory support so that the practice can look at the systems that are in their practice and see if there are anything they can do to help promote patient care. So say, for example, a risk advisory service could educate the practice team on privacy obligations, or could help the practice manager or the practice owner to look at how they track patients' follow-up and referral and best practice for follow-up and referral within the practice. At Avant, these are complementary benefits that are given to practice medical indemnity policy holders. So let's look at the data. At Avant, 1 in 14 practices per year sought our assistance for a claim or patient feedback. This is based on our data for the financial year 16-17 to financial year 2021. The most common pieces of feedback that we helped a practice respond to regarded allegations around communication, and that communication included the alleged failure to follow up a patient's test results appropriately, or alleged discrimination and inappropriate communication with the team at the front desk. And these can lead to a patient perceiving that they didn't have the best experience and providing feedback to APRA, or in a case where there's an alleged failure to follow up test results, they might provide feedback in the form of suing the practice. It is important to note that of those claims that we supported practices with, 69% of practices had the right standard of care. So what does that mean? It means that you can give good care as a practice and you still could receive feedback. So of those 1 in 14 practices, 69%, I'm going to say that again, had the right care. And our role in that situation was to help them to respond to the feedback and to respond to the notice that was provided to them from the lawyer or from APRA. So let's move on to public liability insurance. What is public liability insurance? Public liability insurance essentially supports a practice if a patient injures themselves at the practice and it doesn't relate to the health care that the practice provides. So, for example, the patient might slip over and injure themselves as they enter the practice. They might trip over on a cord, and then they might sue the practice. There are many different types of public liability providers in Australia. A lot of general insurers provide public liability. It's just important to know that as as a practice owner, it is something that is commonly requested in the tenancy agreements, and you should check your tenancy agreements because usually they state the limit of indemnity that a practice owner requires. There's no mandatory limit. It's something that's often asked by the landlord of the building, and it's something that a practice owner may evaluate in consideration of the types of injury a patient might have at the practice. The next type of insurance a practice might consider is business insurance. So some practices can group their public liability insurance into their business insurance product. They can also group their public liability insurance into their PMIP product. It really depends on what they need. Business insurance generally allows a practice to choose the types of support that they need, and this type of support is likely to change as they grow or as their business develops. The beginning type of support is what we would call material damage support, which is like home and contents insurance for a practice. And depending if the practice owner owns the building or if they're a tenant at the building, it would help determine whether or not they need material damage for the building or just the contents at the practice. And often a practice owner would look at their fit out costs to consider what they need for material damage. With business insurance, the most common types of claims for material damage relate to storm damage of the roof. We would also help a practice if the practice had, say, a pipe burst in their ceiling or if the practice burnt down. That's what you're looking to insure. The cost of repairing the building if you're an owner, and the cost of refitting out the practice if you're a tenant and owner should it be destroyed or damaged. It would also respond to support equipment in the practice if it's damaged or dropped. A practice owner might also consider other options within business insurance, such as business interruption insurance, because this might help them operate from an alternate premises if they're not able to function due to a significant event at the practice, say, such as a water pipe bursting in the building or storm damage to the premises. Management liability helps the practice if there is an allegation related to the business decisions of the directors or owners at the practice, or a criminal practice, or potentially a tax audit to the practice. Electronic and machinery breakdown can also help the practice if machinery or electronic equipment don't operate as expected and they're outside of warranty and they've been reasonably maintained. It's important to note that all business insurance policies have different definitions. So as a practice owner, you should consider things like the definition of flood cover. You should consider what material damage cover is, and you should consider what you actually need as a practice at that point in time. There are a lot of optional extras, and business insurance is really designed for you to choose what you need and add things as the business changes, and equally you might take things out. It is important to note that lots of different insurance providers provide business insurance. It is provided by a lot of general insurers, so please take the time to see what meets your needs. Cyber cover. So what is cyber cover? More and more practices have their intellectual property stored online, and cyber insurance provides cover to a practice if there's a ransomware attack or if there's an incident in the practice that influences their cyber or IT systems. At Avant, we provide complimentary cyber insurance to eligible practices when they have a practice medical indemnity policy. So we group their cyber insurance with their practice medical indemnity insurance. With cyber insurance, it's important to note there are commonly things like deductibles or excesses that might apply to the policy. So For example, at Avant, if a practice has combined billings of less than 25 million, we have a $5,000 excess should they need the support of the cyber policy. And if they're above 25 million, our excess is $10,000. An eligible practice to access our complimentary Avant cyber insurance has to have billings of less than $40 million. It is really common for cyber insurance providers to have an excess, so please, when you're looking at cyber insurance and if you need it to protect your IT assets in the practice, make sure you know what that excess is and also understand the support services that are there. One of the reasons we group our medical malpractice insurance with cyber insurance is that it allows our medico-legal advisory service to give information to the practice if there's an alleged breach, because they can help the practice manage the privacy considerations. We also then have the support of our cyber provider that can look to see what's caused the breach, investigate, what systems are compromised, to give guidance to the practice about whether or not it's a claim or something else that we can help them resolve. Lastly, the final type of insurance all practice owners should consider is workers' compensation insurance. We don't provide workers' compensation insurance at Avant because the requirements differ between states and territories, and it's important that as a practice owner, you know that there's a statutory requirement to have it, and that you know that there are state and territory requirements that guide what type of providers can give workers' compensation insurance. As a practice owner, you should also consider your own life and income protection as well, and also what you might need if you're a practice owner and you're providing healthcare services at the practice in terms of key person insurance, i.e. if you're no longer able to provide healthcare at the practice due to illness or for some other reasons, whether or not you need support in place for that. This is something that can be evaluated by a personal advisor, such as a life insurance or an income protection advisor, and that's something that our Avant life insurance team may be able to help you with. In conclusion, there are several different types of insurances a practice owner may need as their practice grows. It's really important for you to evaluate those insurances and to consider what you need. So say, for example, a doctor with practitioner indemnity insurance with Avant, they might be happy with their sole practitioner cover and public liability at the beginning of their practice journey because they've got a small team, they've got sessional suites, and their practice is really in its infancy and beginning its growth journey. When their practice grows and they take out, say, a practice premises, or they bring another doctor into the practice team, or they bring more directors into the practice, they may now decide that they need medical malpractice or practice medical indemnity insurance in place to protect the healthcare that's delivered by their practice team, excluding doctors, and their practice entity. They may also decide that they need more business insurance options now, such as material damage or business interruption insurance, and they may also decide that management liability is something that they want to protect their decisions as a practice owner. The take-home message is please evaluate your insurance needs as your practice grows. Make sure you talk to your medical defence organisation or your insurance provider, because what you're covered for can change as you bring on more team to the practice. We wish you every success in your practice journey. If you've got any questions, please contact your Avant team, contact myself, or use the resources links that are in this slide. It's an exciting journey that you're on, and please feel free to contact us because we're here to help you as your practice ownership journey continues and evolves. Thank you.